drowning is usually linked with water, but some tragedies don't involve it at all. In this video, we'll explore 5 real stories of the most disturbing drownings that did not involve water. These cases will show just how unexpected, terrifying, and tragic these events can truly be. Be prepared. These stories are not for the faint of heart.
Her name was Michelle Dufault, and she died a month short of graduation from Yale with a degree in astronomy and physics.
It was April 12, 2011, just weeks before she was set to graduate from Yale. The future was almost within reach for 22-year-old Michelle Diao. She was brilliant, majoring in astronomy and physics. That night, Michelle was alone, working late in the Sterling Chemistry Laboratory's machine shop. It wasn't unusual. She often pushed herself harder than anyone else, staying long hours, always striving for perfection. She had the mind of a scientist and the soul of an artist, active in sports, gifted on the saxophone, and a proud member of Yale's Precision Marching Band. She had plans, a life waiting beyond the campus gates, but none of that would matter within the next few hours. In that quiet, sterile room, Michelle was operating a lathe, a powerful machine used to shape metal and other materials. It was dangerous work, even for the experienced. Yale's safety protocols were strict, and Michelle had completed the required training. She knew the risks, but even one misstep around such a machine could be fatal. And then, it happened. Somehow, her long, dark hair, beautiful, thick, and falling well below her shoulders, got too close. A fraction of a second, that's all it took. The lathe caught a strand, then another, until suddenly, violently, the machine dragged her in. She was pulled forward, fast. There was no time to scream, no time to escape. The force twisted her hair tighter and tighter, yanking her head into the spinning mechanism. Her neck was caught in a brutal hold. The pressure crushed her windpipe. In seconds, she couldn't breathe. By the time help arrived at 2:33 a.m., Michelle was gone. A fellow student found her body. The sight was devastating. An image burned into memory. A brilliant young woman, full of life and potential, now lying still, taken in silence by a machine she had trusted. News of the accident spread like wildfire across the Yale campus. It didn't seem real. Michelle was gone? The girl who always smiled quietly before answering every question right. The one who stayed behind after lab to help others. Students were stunned. Professors heartbroken. Yale's president, Richard Levin, called it what it was, a true tragedy, but no words could soften the blow. Michelle's family was crushed. Her grandfather, Robert Diao, called her a living saint. Her uncle Frederick, unable to hold back tears, said she was a wonderful kid with so much potential. And that potential? It had been limitless. Michelle was already working on research with real-world applications. She had dreams of oceanography, of contributing to science in ways most people couldn't even imagine. Her teachers in high school had once called her a star, a student with a gift that didn't come around often. She never bragged. She never needed to. Her work spoke for itself. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration opened an immediate investigation. Experts pointed to the risks. Long hair, loose clothing. Both can be deadly around machines like lathes. The lab had policies, but policies aren't always protection. In the aftermath, the lab was shut down. Classes were canceled, and Yale, an institution built on tradition and excellence, was forced to look inward. The administration promised sweeping safety reviews and reforms, but for those closest to Michelle, it was already too late. A vigil was held on campus. Candles flickered against the cold spring air. Students and professors gathered, some holding each other in silence, others stepping forward to share memories. They remembered her kindness, her passion, her focus, her laugh.
A 3-year-old girl accidentally drowns outside an ice cream shop. The Alabama business remains closed as the community mourns.
It was October 14th, 2017 in Auburn, Alabama. The Andrews family, parents Tracy and Corey and their 6 young children, had gathered for a simple treat at Bruster's Real Ice Cream, a familiar and beloved local spot. Among them was Sadie Grace Andrews, 3 years old, blonde hair, eyes full of wonder, a voice that loved to sing, especially her favorite, Jesus Loves Me. Sadie was the kind of child who left an impression on everyone she met. That day, like any other, she danced around her siblings, her tiny feet chasing joy across the lawn. No one could have predicted what was about to happen. In the middle of the cheerful chaos, Sadie wandered a little further, just a few steps beyond where her siblings played. There, outside the view of most eyes, sat a grease trap embedded in the ground, used to store waste oil from the ice cream shop's kitchen. Its lid looked ordinary, unassuming, but it was made of wood, weather-worn and unstable. Sadie stepped on it. The lid gave way under her weight and she vanished into darkness. 6 feet below, the trap was filled with thick, foul grease. The wooden lid flipped back over the opening, hiding her completely. No one saw it happen. No one heard her. Minutes passed, then someone noticed. Sadie wasn't with the others. At first, it was confusion. A glance over the shoulder. A rising unease. Her name was called again and again. Her parents scanned the area, the brightness of the day suddenly feeling dimmer, colder. And then Corey, her father, noticed something. Something wrong. The edge of the grease trap lid was ajar. He rushed over, looked inside, and what he saw shattered everything. He pulled Sadie out. Her body was lifeless, covered in oil. There was no time to process what had just happened. A young employee at the ice cream shop, just a teenager, sprang into action. CPR was started. Hope flickered. Maybe it wasn't too late. But hope isn't always enough. Paramedics rushed Sadie to East Alabama Medical Center. But the doctors couldn't save her. The little girl who had brought so much light into the world was gone. Sadie's sudden death didn't just devastate her family. It stunned the entire community. Brewster's Real Ice Cream was more than a business. It was a piece of the town's heart. Its owners, Lance and Carol Liam, released a statement expressing deep sorrow. They spoke of heartbreak, of the weight of what had occurred. Their young employee who had tried to save Sadie would carry the trauma forever. But grief wasn't enough. Tracy and Corey Andrews were determined that their daughter's death would not be in vain. They filed a lawsuit against Brewster's and the company that manufactured the trap lid, Tough Tight Incorporated. Their attorney, J. Cole Portis, made it clear Sadie's death was preventable. The trap never should have had a wooden lid. It should have been secured. This wasn't an accident. It was a failure. The Andrews family turned their pain into purpose. They worked with lawmakers, they pushed for change, and they won. Alabama passed the Sadie Grace Andrews Act, a law requiring all grease traps to be covered with durable, locking lids. But the world doesn't always change fast enough. A few years later, Corey read the news. Another child, another grease trap, this time in Rochester, New York. Corey's heart broke all over again. The grief never left, but now it flared with anger. More had to be done. It wasn't enough to fix the law in Alabama. This had to be nationwide. No more children should die this way. The Andrews family created Sadie's Hope Ministries, a nonprofit born from tragedy. They began sending care packages to grieving families, offering comfort to those walking through the same fire.
On November 23, 2018, 76-year-old Loretta Pickard perished in a fire at her Polk County, Florida, home.
It was November 23, 2018, just another quiet evening in Polk County, Florida. But for 76-year-old Loretta Pickard, it would become the setting of an unthinkable nightmare. Alone in her remote log cabin, relying on a walker to move, Loretta's world turned into a prison of smoke and fire in a matter of minutes. She did what anyone would do. She called 911. Her voice was steady at first. She told the dispatcher her house was on fire, calmly, trying to hold it together. On the other end of the line, the dispatcher asked questions, took notes, promised help was on the way. But time was running out, and Loretta knew it. The smoke came fast. Every breath burned. Her lungs began to fail her, but she stayed on the line, hoping someone would arrive in time. She asked softly, "They know I'm in here, right?" Her voice, once steady, was now tight with fear. She was trying to unlock the front door, trying to survive. Outside, firefighters had reached the scene, but they didn't go in. The fire was intense, the cabin far from any water source. They said they had to wait for more water, wait for backup. But Loretta didn't have time to wait. She stayed on the line for nearly 20 minutes as the fire consumed everything around her. The dispatcher kept repeating the same words, "Help is coming." But the flames kept growing, and the air kept disappearing. At 7:06 p.m., they confirmed she was still inside. By 7:10, she was struggling to breathe, and still, no one went in. Loretta was dying, slowly, painfully, her lungs filled with smoke, her skin likely searing in the rising heat. The flames were closing in, and she could see them now. She screamed for help, screamed with every ounce of strength she had left, but the only reply was silence. By 7:28 p.m., her voice vanished, gone. The dispatcher stayed on the line. "I'm still here with you," she said. But Loretta wasn't responding anymore. Her body had given up, burned, broken, suffocated by the very air she had to breathe. It wasn't until 3 hours later, at 10:26 p.m., that the fire was finally brought under control. Inside the ashes of the cabin, they found Loretta's body, charred beyond recognition. But the pain didn't end there. For her family, what came next was even more unbearable. They learned that firefighters had been on the scene for over 14 minutes while Loretta was still alive inside. Not one had attempted a rescue. And then came the ultimate betrayal. Captain James Williams, the lead firefighter that night, had posted a photo of the blaze on Snapchat, while Loretta was still burning inside. No rescue, no urgency, just a photo for social media. He was suspended, yes, but the damage was irreversible. The investigation revealed a chilling truth. Communication between dispatch and the fire crew had broken down. Resources were limited. The crew lacked experience, but even worse, they lacked action. Loretta died waiting, not for rescue, for someone to care enough to try. Her family filed a lawsuit. They wanted justice, not just for Loretta, but to make sure no one else would ever suffer like she did. The 911 operator hadn't given life-saving instructions. The firefighters hadn't acted fast enough. The system had failed at every level.
The victim of an industrial accident from this week in Allegan County is Robert Herwire. According to Robert's father, the 23-year-old died after he was overcome by fumes at AgriScience Technology Company in Saugatuck on Tuesday.
It was the morning of July 26, 2016, in Laketown Township, Michigan. Robert Herre was just 23 years old. He had a new home, a loving wife, and a baby due within the week. In every way, his life was just beginning. 8 months earlier, he had married Joy, the woman he loved deeply. Together, they had built dreams, bought a house, and were counting down the final days until they became parents. Robert, a former high school athlete who loved fishing and hunting, was the kind of person people gravitated to, kind-hearted, always smiling, always ready to lend a hand. That morning, Robert reported for work at AgriScience Technologies, a small agricultural company in town. It was supposed to be just another day, nothing out of the ordinary. He was asked to help clean a large industrial plastic tank filled with diluted molasses, a thick, sticky substance often used in farming. The tank stood nearly 12 feet tall, partially drained, but still heavy with the slow, dark liquid. As the level dropped, removing the rest became difficult. Someone needed to go inside and adjust a valve. Robert, always eager to help, volunteered. He geared up, protective waders, a safety mask, believing he'd be fine, believing this was just part of the job. He was lowered in using a forklift and straps, descending slowly into the massive, echoing chamber of the tank. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. He reached the valve, he adjusted it. No issues. Then, as he began climbing back up, something changed. He stopped moving. Kevin de Herrera, a co-worker assisting him, noticed the stillness. At first, he called out. No response. Robert just stood there, unmoving, his body pressed against the tank wall. Panic set in. Kevin tried pulling him out using the straps, but couldn't. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Kevin ran for help. The company's owner, David Alexander, rushed to the scene. With no time to waste, he grabbed an electric saw and began cutting into the side of the tank. It took precious minutes. They could only hope Robert was still breathing. By the time they reached him, he had slipped into the molasses, submerged, hidden in the slow, suffocating syrup. They pulled him out as fast as they could, stripped off his mask, laid him down, began CPR, but it was already too late. Paramedics arrived. They did everything they could. He was rushed to Holland Community Hospital, but Robert was gone. The thick liquid had stolen the breath from his lungs. And just like that, a life full of promise was extinguished. In the days that followed, Joy would give birth to their child without him by her side. The moment that was supposed to be filled with joy and tears of happiness was now haunted by loss. An investigation by the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration soon followed. Molasses isn't just thick, it's deadly in enclosed spaces. It releases gases that can silently drain oxygen from the air. In the days after, the community rallied. A GoFundMe set up by Robert's sister-in-law raised over $112,000 in a matter of days. On July 30th, Robert's funeral was held at Bethany United Reformed Church. Family, friends, co-workers. The sanctuary was filled with people whose lives he had touched. They remembered the boy who grew into a man with compassion, humor, and integrity. The man who should have lived to see his child's first steps, their first words, their first day of school.
Initially, it was suspected that David got the infection from eating chicken until one of his friends came forward and said that he ate a gecko at the party.
It was December 1st, 2018, in Logan, Queensland, Australia. David Dowell, 34 years old, was in his element, surrounded by family and close friends. And then someone, maybe joking, maybe serious, dared David to eat a gecko. Most people would have laughed it off, but this was David, the man who never said no to a dare. Others weren't sure. His partner of 15 years, Aira, admitted she wasn't paying attention. Music, drinks, conversation. It was just another wild story. But the next morning, everything changed. David woke up feeling off. Maybe it was a hangover, he thought. But by the next day, it was clear. This wasn't just a hangover. He began vomiting. His stomach twisted in pain. It grew worse, fast. By December 3rd, his family knew something was terribly wrong. An ambulance was called. Paramedics thought it might be gastro, something viral. He was taken to Mater Hospital in Brisbane. But what they couldn't see, what no one yet understood, was that something inside David was eating him alive. On December 4th, a diagnosis, salmonella, a bad one. Doctors thought it might be undercooked food, chicken maybe. But when Aira mentioned the gecko, everything changed. Could it have been the lizard? Was it even real? No one knew for sure. But now, it was too late to wonder. David's body was shutting down. His abdomen swelled grotesquely. He vomited green fluid, his urine turned dark, and fluid began to fill his lungs. He could barely speak. His testicles ballooned to the size of grapefruits, leaking fluid, and his skin became clammy and pale. It was as if something inside him had begun to rot, slowly, relentlessly. His family watched, helpless. His sister Hannah described the pain in his eyes, how he gritted his teeth and moaned despite the medication. His little girls, Alyssa, Claudia, and Sage, didn't understand why Daddy couldn't talk or play anymore. Eventually, he was placed in a coma. That lively, joking, big-hearted man, now still and silent, surrounded by machines and the steady beep of a failing heart. On December 11th, 10 days after the party, David was taken into emergency surgery. His body was weak, too weak, and in that operating room, with doctors doing everything they could, David slipped away, just like that. Ira and the girls were left in shock, numb with disbelief. How had it come to this? Could a silly dare really have stolen a life? Or was there more? Medical experts confirmed geckos can carry salmonella. It's rare, but it's possible. If David had eaten it, even on a dare, it might have been what triggered the infection that took his life. But that's the thing. No one ever knew for certain. David's family had questions. Too many. Why did it take so long for the hospital to take him seriously? Why did they have to plead for pain relief? Why did he have to suffer so long before they moved him to intensive care? Hannah said it plainly. It wasn't until he was almost gone that they acted like he was in real danger. The hospital insisted they did everything they could. The coroner would later rule the same, but none of it erased the image of David, bloated, broken, and dying before their eyes. He should have been joking in the backyard, laughing with his girls, not gasping for air in a sterile hospital room. On what would have been his 35th birthday, the family gathered by the Logan River, where David used to love fishing. They lit paper boats with handwritten messages and let them float into the water. A quiet goodbye to the man who used to make every gathering louder, brighter, better.
There are almost 150 working distilleries throughout Scotland, and each one is unique in its own.
It was January 7th, 2012. A cold, quiet Saturday evening in Dufftown, Scotland. The kind of night when everything feels still, tucked beneath a heavy sky. Dufftown, home to the world-renowned Glenfiddich Distillery, had always taken pride in its legacy. But that evening, a tragedy unfolded that would shake the town to its core. Brian Edelston was 46 years old, a quiet, respected man with 23 years at Glenfiddich. He was a team leader, admired by co-workers for his dedication and calm strength. Just the night before, he and his wife Irene had celebrated her birthday. No one could have imagined what would happen next. At 10:40 p.m., emergency services were called to the distillery. Brian had entered one of the enormous washback tanks, massive wooden vats used in fermentation. Despite firefighters' efforts, he couldn't be saved. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities said there were no suspicious circumstances, but that only deepened the sense of mystery and sorrow. Why had he gone in? What had happened in those final moments? The distillery closed for 2 days. In Dufftown's pubs and homes, the news spread fast. Even those who didn't know Brian well felt the loss. Neighbors described him as steady and kind. A waitress at a local pub recalled him stopping in for the occasional drink. "Nice enough," she said, her voice heavy with disbelief. For his family, wife Irene and their 2 adult children, shock gave way to silent grief. Irene later said there was nothing to do now but try to move forward. The questions lingered. Had Brian been silently struggling? Had the weight of something unseen become too much? There were no answers, just echoes of speculation and the aching reminder that not all battles are visible. For his colleagues, passing the washback tanks now felt different. To tourists, they were symbols of tradition. But to those who worked with Brian, they had become haunted landmarks. Brian had spent over 2 decades helping build Glenfiddich's legacy. Now, his death had become part of it. It was a story of unseen pain, of a man loved and lost without warning. Life eventually moved on in Dufftown, but beneath the routine, something had shifted. Brian Edelston's name stayed with the people of that town, not just because of how he died, but because of the quiet, steady life he led. A life that mattered. A loss that should never have been silent.
Authorities say 23-year-old Colin Scott was trying to hot pot just before he fell into a scalding hot geyser earlier this year.
It was June in 2016 when 23-year-old Colin Nathaniel Scott set out with his sister Sable to explore the stunning, otherworldly landscapes of Yellowstone National Park. But by the end of that day, only one of them would return. Colin had recently graduated with honors from Pacific University, full of ambition and ready to start a doctoral program in psychology. This was meant to be a moment of celebration. But nature can be merciless, and Yellowstone hides some of the deadliest secrets beneath its surface. They made their way into the Norris Geyser Basin, one of the park's most geologically active and dangerous areas. But behind the beauty lurked something far more sinister. The water in these hot springs can reach 400 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt flesh. The crust around them? Thin, brittle, unpredictable. Despite warning signs and barricades, Colin and Sable stepped off the designated boardwalk. They were looking for a place to hot pot, a highly dangerous and illegal activity where people soak in the park's hot springs, mistaking them for natural spas. But these waters are not for healing. They are filled with toxic chemicals and superheated to deadly temperatures. As Colin tested the temperature of one small spring with his hand, the ground beneath him suddenly gave way. In an instant, he slipped and fell straight into the boiling, acidic water. Sable could do nothing but scream as her brother disappeared beneath the surface, the steam rising around her like a curtain closing on a nightmare. She called for help immediately, but deep down, she must have known. When Yellowstone Rangers arrived, they quickly realized the recovery would be nearly impossible. The spring wasn't just hot, it was corrosive. Highly acidic water eats away at organic matter with horrifying speed. They found only fragments. Colin's wallet, his flip-flops still resting at the edge. But then, a lightning storm rolled in, forcing the team to pause recovery efforts. When they returned the next day, there was nothing left. Not a single trace of Colin's body remained. The spring had dissolved him completely. The agony Colin must have experienced in those final moments is almost too much to comprehend. The water would have scalded his skin instantly, causing third-degree burns within seconds. But the acidic nature of the spring would have made the pain even worse, far beyond what most of us could imagine. Death came fast, but not before unthinkable suffering. Park officials confirmed what everyone feared. There was nothing left to bring home, nothing to bury, nothing for his family to hold on to but memories. Colin's death sent shockwaves through the park and beyond. It wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a harrowing reminder of how deceptive nature can be. The same geothermal features that attract millions of tourists each year are also capable of taking lives in the most horrific ways. Yet, people still ignore the warnings. They still venture off the boardwalk for a better photo, a closer look, a thrill. Some don't realize that just inches away from where they stand, the ground could collapse into scalding, acidic death. Since Yellowstone's founding, at least 22 people have died from accidents involving thermal features, but few as horrifying as Colin's. For Sable, the pain of that day will never fade. She had to watch her brother vanish before her eyes, knowing she couldn't save him. It was August 17, 2000, at the Ford Transit Van plant in Southampton, England. Among the many faces was Christopher, a 30-year-old technical advisor for Philips Services Europe Limited, a contractor hired to troubleshoot problems around the plant. Christopher knew the ins and outs of the facility, but nothing could prepare him for the tragedy that day, an accident both preventable and heartbreaking. At the heart of the plant's paint recycling system stood a towering 10,000-gallon tank. Its job was to collect and process leftover paint for reuse, a vital piece of the operation. But from the start, this tank was a hazard. Raised 2.4 meters above the floor, reachable only by a ladder, its top was slick with layers of paint residue and no guardrails protected those who climbed it. Despite these dangers, no meaningful safety fixes were made. The warnings had been there. A worker had fallen into the tank during cleaning once before, lucky enough to survive. But that near tragedy didn't spark the changes needed. That morning, Christopher was called to deal with yet another overflow. Foam and paint were spilling over the tank, one of its lids removed, leaving a dangerous gap in its surface. The paint made everything slippery, the opening almost invisible beneath the thick layers. Christopher climbed the ladder, steady but cautious, and stepped onto the slick surface. His footing slipped. Time seemed to slow as he vanished through the uncovered hole, swallowed by the thick, toxic paint mixture below. A colleague reached out, desperate to save him, but the slick surface betrayed them both. Christopher disappeared into the tank, trapped by the heavy, viscous paint. No matter how hard he struggled, escape was impossible. Emergency crews rushed in. Firefighters, paramedics, heroes fighting against time. But when they pulled Christopher out, he was unresponsive. Despite their best efforts, he was gone. Investigations uncovered a grim truth. The tank's design was a disaster waiting to happen. No guardrails, a slippery surface, no proper safety protocols. Ford and its contractors had known the dangers, had seen the risks, but had done nothing meaningful to protect their workers. At Winchester Crown Court, Ford and two contractors, Peter Preston and Paul McKenzie, faced charges under the Health and Safety at Work Act. Preston and McKenzie were initially charged with more serious offenses, but later pleaded guilty to lesser failures. Ford admitted to breaching safety laws, acknowledging their failure to provide a safe workplace. The company was fined hundreds of thousands of pounds, £300,000 for endangering employees, and £250,000 for putting others at risk. Preston and McKenzie each faced a £5,000 fine, penalties many saw as shockingly light for a life lost. Judge Stuart McKinnon did not mince words. He called the accident entirely unnecessary, a disaster waiting to happen, and condemned the systemic failings at Ford. Yet, he explained, fines were based on financial factors, not on the true value of a human life. For Christopher's family, the courtroom's verdict offered little comfort. His sister, Anne Gundry, spoke out with pain and frustration, especially over the dropping of more serious charges. The full story, she felt, had never been told.
It has been a decade since grade R learner Michael Komape drowned in a pit toilet at Mahlodimela Primary School in Chebeng, outside Polokwane.
It was January 20th, 2014, in Limpopo, South Africa. For the Cap family, it was a proud day. Their little boy Michael, just 5 years old, had recently started grade R at Maladoom Primary School. But by the end of that day, their entire world would come crashing down. Michael's school, like many others in rural South Africa, didn't have proper toilets. There was no plumbing, no safety measures, just rusted sheets of corrugated metal, warped wooden planks, and pit latrines dug deep into the earth. But for children like Michael, this was normal. He probably thought nothing of it when he asked to use the restroom during class. After all, how could a 5-year-old imagine that a toilet could become a death trap? When Michael entered the makeshift structure, he stepped over a fragile metal sheet used as a toilet seat. And then it gave way. The sheet collapsed beneath him. Michael plummeted into the pit, a narrow hole filled with human waste, hidden in shadow and stench, drowning in the most horrific way imaginable. No one noticed at first. Hours passed. His classmates returned to their lessons. Teachers carried on. No alarm was raised. It wasn't until someone finally went to check the toilet that the horror was uncovered. What they saw would leave a scar on the community forever. Michael's small, lifeless hand reaching up through the filth, as if still calling for help. The news spread like wildfire. James Cappy, Michael's father, rushed to the school, heart pounding with dread. The grief was instant and paralyzing. But the horror didn't stop there. It took emergency crews over 4 hours to retrieve Michael's body. The autopsy revealed chilling details: wrinkled feet from prolonged exposure, confirming he had been submerged for a long, agonizing time. A friend of the family tried to take photos as evidence, images that could support a legal case, but school staff intervened. They forcibly deleted them, as if erasing the evidence could erase the responsibility. Rosina, Michael's mother, learned of the tragedy through a call. When she arrived and saw her son's arm in that pit, she fainted. Her grief became so overwhelming that she later lost her job, unable to function, unable to heal. What happened to Michael wasn't just a tragedy, it was a crime of neglect, a symbol of systemic failure. The outrage spread beyond Limpopo. Across South Africa, over 4,500 schools relied on pit latrines, many dangerously constructed like the one that took Michael's life. The Constitution promises every child access to basic sanitation, but for thousands, that promise was empty, and Michael paid the price. With the help of a human rights organization, Section 27, the Cap family took legal action. They sued the Limpopo Department of Education for over 2 million rand, around $110,000, seeking compensation for trauma, constitutional violations, and funeral costs. But the fight for justice was long and painful. In 2018, Judge Garrett Muller acknowledged that the government had failed to ensure safe sanitation. Yet, unbelievably, he dismissed the family's emotional damages claim, citing a lack of sufficient evidence of trauma. The decision sent a wave of disbelief and anger through the country. What more evidence did they need? The Cap family refused to give up. They appealed, taking their fight to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and this time the judges listened. One called Michael's death one of the most undignified imaginable. The court also heard about other children, like 5-year-old Lumka Maketwa, who died in a similar way in 2018 in the Eastern Cape. Michael's story was no longer just one tragedy. It was the face of a national crisis. In 2020, the Cap family finally won. The court awarded them 1.4 million rand, around $77,000, for the emotional shock and grief they endured. The ruling was seen as a landmark moment, a small measure of justice for a family that had lost everything.
Why do these things seem to only happen in China? A 23-year-old woman in Xinjiang province was taking a shower when her phone rang. Her iPhone 5 was on the charger, and when she picked it up, it electrocuted her to death.
It was a quiet night in 2014 in Kashi, Xinjiang. 18-year-old Wu Yuan, a dedicated student far from her hometown of Urumqi, had just finished her studies for the evening. She lay in bed, exhausted but content, her iPhone 4S charging on the nightstand beside her. Her sister was working late. The apartment was empty but familiar, and Wu, like millions of others that night, was scrolling through her phone, chatting with loved ones, keeping ties strong with friends and family hundreds of miles away. Everything seemed normal, but in the stillness, something invisible was already happening. When her sister finally returned home, she knew instantly that something was wrong. The air was heavy with the stench of burning plastic and something else, sharper, more metallic. Panic rising in her chest, she called out to Wu. No answer. She ran to the bedroom. What she found would stay with her forever. Wu was lying motionless on the bed, her body horribly burned. Her skin was blackened, blistered, and cracked. Her phone, now shattered and scorched, lay beside her. The image was unbearable. One moment Wu had been there, laughing, breathing, alive. Now, gone. She called for help, her hands trembling, but it was too late. Wu Yuan was already dead. The investigation that followed revealed something chilling. The cause of death, electrocution. The current had entered through Wu's hand and foot, traveling through her body with unrelenting force. The source? A counterfeit phone charger. The device, meant to provide simple convenience, had failed catastrophically. It leaked electricity, surging through the cable, into the phone, and then directly into Wu as she used it. She never stood a chance. Imagine it. The quiet beginning, the stillness, then a sudden jolt, a flash, a scream that may never have had time to escape her lips, high voltage current ripping through muscle, nerves, skin, everything. The heart, trying to beat, suddenly stops. Muscles lock up, every fiber of the body in agony. Electrocution doesn't give warnings. It gives you pain, and then it takes everything. All from a phone charger, and not just any charger. A counterfeit one. Cheap, flimsy, lacking the safety mechanisms that real chargers are built with. The kind of corners cut by manufacturers who care more about profit than human life. Wu wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. In 2015, a world away in Moscow, a young woman named Evgenia Sedenko met a similar fate. She was 24, taking a bath, her phone charging nearby. It slipped, touched the water. Her body went rigid in an instant. Her heart stopped. Her roommate found her minutes later, too late. The charger? Counterfeit. Again, 2 lives, 2 young women, 2 dreams, erased by something that should never have been allowed near a wall socket. Wu's family was shattered. Their daughter had traveled to Kashi to build a future, to study, to chase a life filled with possibility. Now they were left with only questions, grief, and a story that no family should ever have to tell. The store that sold the phone later reached out, but what could they say? What could they offer that would make up for what had happened? There is no refund for a lost life, no replacement for a daughter who never comes home. Wu Yuan's story is a painful reminder of how ordinary things, routine things, can turn fatal in an instant. We plug in our devices every day. We charge while we sleep. We scroll, we talk, we text, never thinking that the cord in our hand might be the last thing we ever touch. But it happens. It happened to Wu. This isn't just about one tragedy. It's about choices. It's about safety. It's about refusing to gamble with something as precious as life. Counterfeit electronics may look harmless. They may be cheap, but they carry a cost you can't measure in dollars. A cost paid in pain, in screams never heard, in futures never lived.